Publishing Inside Out, the editorial process. Up till this point in the course, you have been working primarily from the point of view of the author. And for the last couple of weeks, you've kind of had your head down writing, mostly solo, to work on your book proposals, which are now complete. So congratulations. One of the cool things about the way this course plays out over the semester is that you've kind of done the hardest project already. And so now we get to do the fun stuff, which is peer review and then design and marketing, where we get to play with pictures and designs and social media and fun stuff. So we're kind of at a big turning point where we're going to step out of our author roles and step into editor roles. So remember, at the beginning of this class, I talked about the class is organized to give you a 360-degree view of the process. Well, now we're shifting basically 180 degrees from one side of the desk, the author's side, to the other side, the editor's side. So remember this diagram from one of the earlier videos. This is intended to show the idea of publishing as a collaborative process with shared risks and shared reward. And so on the left, we have the author with her laptop, and on the right is the editor, represented by that little line drawing from the Noun project. And we talked about how authors and editors are seeking to find alignment on the three categories of audience, mission, and topic. So now we're going to look in a little more detail at how that actually works from the point of view of the editor. So you're now, imagine that you're taking your author hat off and putting your editor hat on. You're going to be reading proposals written by other authors to evaluate them as if you were an editor. And you're going to be working basically in two different but related roles: acquisitions editor and development editor. Now, there's some really great information in the Publishing Inside Out course text. There's some interviews with my friend Jess, and there's some other information about both acquisitions and development. There's also some wonderful material in the Peter Ginna book in those readings. So before you go too far down this road, please read or reread those chapters and make some notes and consider what are the differences between acquisitions editors and development editors. I'll give you a little preview of that here. The point being that in some large publishing companies, the acquisitions editor and the development editor are two different people, literally two heads, two brains. That's always been true for me working in the college publishing world. The acquisitions editors simply don't have enough time to actually read and edit the manuscript, so they hire people like me to do the editorial work. In other cases, in smaller companies and in many forms of scholarly publishing and also in a lot of trade publishing, the acquisitions editor and the development editor are actually the same person. Usually her title or his title is acquisitions editor, but depending on where the process is in the stages of the publishing process, that person may be more thinking like an acquisitions editor or more thinking like a development editor. So at the early stages, that one person is thinking like an acquisitions editor: is this book publishable? Can I make it work for me? And then later they're thinking like a development editor after they've signed a contract and agreed to work with that author. Now they're thinking like a development editor. But regardless of whether it's one brain with two processes or literally two different people, two different brains, we can identify different things and different types of questions that these people ask. In your role now, in Unit 6 of the course as a peer reviewer, you're going to be thinking along both lines. So let's look at the acquisitions editor. The acquisitions editor asks this kind of questions when she's analyzing a book proposal. How does this book fit with other similar books in the market? How does this book fit with other books on my list, right? Within your own publishing company, books you have already published yourself on your own list as a publisher. Can I publish this book successfully, right? And success might be defined in different ways. It might be defined in terms of sales. It might be defined in terms of influence and impact. It might be defined in some other qualitative way in terms of the mission and purpose of the publisher. So success is not always about being a bestseller. So you have to think about, as an acquisitions editor, what type of book are you publishing? How do you define success? And then last but not least, particularly important to us now, is the final question here: what revisions do I want to ask the author to make? Okay, so this is the acquisitions editor, kind of her mindset when she's first looking at that proposal. Now let's look at the corresponding questions that a development editor would ask. They're a little bit different. The development editor is looking at this and saying, what is the author's vision for this book? How clearly is that vision articulated in the proposal? Is the organization of the book clear and sensible? Does the author connect with readers? Is the story of the book compelling? And then ultimately we get to the same question, what revisions do I want the author to make? And there will always be revisions. As author, get used to being asked to make revisions to everything you write over and over and over again. That's just part of the publishing process. And ideally, if you're working with good editors, every revision makes it better. So that's a snapshot. And then to get more depth, again, please refer back to the course readings and begin thinking about these questions related to the types of books that your proposal is going to work on. Now, because we're making this big shift, I want to talk a little bit more about what it means when we talk about how to think like an editor. Now, as many of you recognize, when people at large in general say the word editor, they imagine a copy editor with a red pencil marking grammar and style and sentence level edits. That is not at all what we're talking about at this stage of the process. We're talking big picture. So this is a quote from Peter Ginna in the introduction to his book, What Editors Do. His introduction is called The Three Phases of Editing. And I think this is a nice quote to capture what it means to think like an editor. And Ginna says, the editor represents the reader to the author and vice versa. In other words, also represents the author to the reader. Let's read that again. The editor represents the reader to the author and vice versa. So he goes on to elaborate what he means by that point. To edit a manuscript effectively, you must put yourselves in the shoes of someone who's picking up the book with no prior knowledge of the author or the project's history. In other words, you have to try to look at it through fresh eyes. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's picking up the book with no prior knowledge. At the same time, you must grasp what the writer is trying to accomplish in the book. Sometimes this will be more evident to you than to the author. I think that's a key point. Sometimes editors see things that authors don't. Authors take things for granted. And as an editor, you might say, wow, did you realize how you're really saying something important here? Why don't you make that your first sentence? So a lot of times you can see things that the author can't see. That's obviously why this is an important part of the process, right? You are not in that author's brain. You are seeing things that he or she cannot see. So that's an important point. Sometimes this will be more evident to you than to the author. And to publish a book well, you must combine that understanding of the author's vision with your knowledge of the marketplace, of what readers are looking for and how they will find it. So let's read that whole thing again. The editor represents the reader to the author and vice versa. To edit a manuscript effectively, you must put yourselves in the shoes of someone who's picking up the book with no prior knowledge of the author or the project's history. At the same time, you must grasp what the writer is trying to accomplish in the book. Sometimes this will be more evident to you than to the author. And to publish a book well, you must combine that understanding of the author's vision with your knowledge of the marketplace, of what readers are looking for and how they will find it. So that is a really nice snapshot of what you are going to be doing for the next 2 weeks when you are thinking like an editor and doing this peer review workshop project. So let me talk a little bit more and give you some specific directions of how that's going to work. So up on the screen here is Project 7. It's called the Proposal Evaluation Memo. Each of you will complete 2 of these based on 2 proposals from peers in your group. But before you do that, you're going to actually work on the proposal itself as part of a team. So let me read these directions here at the top of the page. This is what it says to do. This proposal is a generic form that can be used to evaluate a book proposal on any topic. Working with your group, develop an additional 3 or more questions to add to the 7 listed here. These additional questions should represent criteria that are specific to the genre or topic of books your group is working on. Consult with your group to determine the most useful and relevant criteria to use for evaluating the types of books you are working on. Okay, so that's part 1 of this project, is to work as a team with your group to actually revise and expand this template. So as a team, you are trying to decide, based on the kinds of books that we as a team are working on, what are the criteria that we want to add to this list? So the criteria that are on this evaluation memo now are general criteria that you would be used regardless of what kind of book it is, right? The overview. So you're evaluating this proposal, you're reading Project 6, as it is known in this class this year. You're reading Project 6 for other people in your group. So you want to evaluate the overview and give a little overview statement, right? Your summary at the top. But then you're looking at the title and subtitle, the hook or short version of the story, the description or long version of the story, the target audience and competing titles, the writing style and voice, and the organization. So those are broad criteria that apply to any kind of book, right? But then what I want you to do as a group, and all of you have to agree on these final 3 criteria before you can move forward. What specific things do you as an editor want to see in a proposal? How will you assess these things? What are you looking for in a proposal? So these are 3 questions that will be unique to your group. So let's say your group is based on, you're all working on memoirs. There will certainly be one or more groups, memoir focus groups, because there's a lot of you writing these kind of personal nonfiction, creative nonfiction memoirs. So an editor publishing a memoir is looking for very, very different things than an editor publishing a how-to book about photography, right? Or an editor publishing a cookbook, right? Your readers expect different things from memoirs than they expect for cookbooks. So what you want to do is put your heads together as an editorial team before you move on to actually filling out these forms and evaluating each other's proposals, and think about, all right, what kinds of books are we looking at in our group, and what specifically are we looking for in addition to these generic things at the top? Okay, so if your group is writing personal memoirs, you want to identify what are the 3 or 4 or 5, as many as you want. What are the additional criteria that you really want to see as an editor who's editing and publishing memoirs? That will be very different to those of you who are working on other kinds of nonfiction projects, right? So take a moment, assess your topics, think about what you're working on, take a step back, and then say, all right, what are some additional criteria that we can agree on as a group that we want to use to evaluate each other's proposals? You write these questions. Just think about, you can phrase them as questions, you can think of them as categories, however you want to phrase it is up to you guys as a group. But come to a consensus over the next week and write these 3 or 4 or more additional questions or criteria that you guys in your group agree are important for your type of book. So what you're actually doing here is identifying what you think of as what's going to make a book successful in our genre or in our topic. What would we be looking for as an editor, as an acquisitions editor, as a development editor, and ultimately as a reader who's going to buy these books? In addition to these very broad general categories at the top of the page, what do you want to add that will really help you get at and give each other really helpful feedback on your proposals, okay? So that's step 1 of this project, is to really think about your type of project and define these additional criteria. And then as a group, post your final version of your revised template for Project 7, and then you will then use that revised template that's just specific and custom to your group to evaluate the proposals of the other members of your group. So the next thing you need to do then is go on to the Blackboard discussion forum, find your group, post your proposal, explain a little bit about what your topic is, and kind of touch base with your group to figure out what kind of topics are we working on, and start brainstorming what you want to add here. It'll take some time. It'll be a little bit of back and forth. It's intended to be a collaborative project at which you ultimately arrive at a shared understanding of what you want to add to this template. So that's part 1. And then part 2 is to use the template to do peer reviews in week 2 of Unit 6. Okay, so that's where we're heading in our Thinking Like an Editor unit, Unit 6. Thanks for listening.